in the village of Giulino di Megzegra, the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, was shot by partisans. His mistress, Caretta Patacci, was executed alongside him. He died not as a warrior, not as a martyr, but as a fugitive in disguise, a little bit like Saddam Hussein, caught in the back what's the Libyan man? Caught in the back of a German convoy while trying to flee to Switzerland. Mussolini had come a long way from being the world's first fascist leader, the inventor of the fascist salute, where Elon Musk wants to call it a Roman salute or the Nazi salute. It doesn't really make any difference. It's still the same thing. And a bombastic showman, the Prime Minister of Italy for over 2 decades, to this ignoble end. The man who sought to revive the Roman Empire died slumped in a muddy lorry, glassy-eyed and spiritually broken. And why does this matter now? Because 8 decades on, the memory of Mussolini remains dangerously contested. In Italy this week, hundreds of self-proclaimed neo-fascists gathered in Predappio, his birthplace, to mark the occasion, not with shame but with salutes, banners and declarations of loyalty. And meanwhile, some French far-right factions echoed their sorrow that the Duce was executed without trial, as though a court of law might have acquitted a man whose regime committed war crimes, used chemical weapons in Ethiopia, persecuted Jews, and helped enable the Holocaust. And in Britain, astonishingly, we still have councillors like those recently in Poole who hesitate to commemorate Victory in Europe Day in case it offends those who don't like conflict. One might wonder what exactly do they think was achieved in 1945, if not the decisive defeat of fascism. And if we don't celebrate something positive, if we don't remember the positives, memory is a peculiar thing, it will remember the negatives. Mussolini's career is a textbook in charismatic authoritarianism. His rise was not accidental. It was built on discontent, national humiliation, economic anxiety, political drift. Does it sound familiar? He offered restoration. He promised pride. He wore uniforms, gave stirring speeches, invoked imperial grandeur. He criminalized dissent, centralized power, glamorized violence. Many Italians cheered him, at least at first, because fascism, as George Orwell said, is psychologically far sounder than any hedonistic conception of life. And for a while Mussolini delivered, draining marshes, building railways, reducing crime. But the cost was silence about torture, repression, and eventually genocide, silence about the tens of thousands of Libyans who died in Italian concentration camps in the 1930s, civilians starved and diseased in desert enclosures that prefigured what the Nazis would later do in the concentration camps. And by the end, Mussolini was no longer the master of Italy, but the puppet of Hitler. His so-called Italian Social Republic was a sham, a German dependency, born of delusion and sustained by fear. Even his last hours were marked not by dignity, but farce, disguised in a Luftwaffe coat, caught by chance and dispatched by men who had suffered too long under his rule. His body was hung upside down in Milan's Central Square, where a year earlier fascists had left the corpses of executed partisans to rot in the sun. Mussolini's desecrated body was a grim mirror, a grotesque revenge, and it was also a turning point, the visible, undeniable collapse of fascist myth. And yet the myth endures. Why? Because the work of memory is hard. Italy never underwent a full process of de-fascistization. Its many judges, civil servants and business leaders had once worn black shirts. The post-war state needed unity, not reckoning, and so slowly nostalgia crept back, and the myth of Mussolini, who made the trains run on time, lives on in stickers, slogans, even Senate offices. Much like in Russia, the myth of Stalin runs on. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's party has post-fascist roots, and the current president of the Senate reportedly keeps a bust of Il Duce in his office. It would be wrong to say that Italy is reverting to fascism, but it is correct to say that fascism is no longer unthinkable, and in that we all share some culpability. We need to be clear. Mussolini was not merely a strongman or a misguided patriot. He was an architect of dictatorship, an instigator of war, a participant in genocide. His contempt for democracy, disdain for civil society, obsession with racial hierarchies should be remembered with the same clarity with which we remember Hitler's crimes. But often they are not. And so when town councils hesitate to mark VE Day, or when we find euphemisms creeping into our commemorations, calling fascism merely controversial or its adherents misunderstood, we must push back. This is not the age of Jean Brodie. History is not a buffet. We do not get to pick only the palatable parts, and while we cannot live our lives in perpetual rage about the past, we must never forget that fascism flourishes where memory fails. Mussolini's final hours were inglorious, his corpse defiled, his legacy rightly damned. But today we do not mark his anniversary with glee or vengeance. We remember the price of silence, the price of forgetting. And that's why this nonsense in Poole needs to be condemned. We shouldn't forget what happened in 1945. We should remember the positives. We should remember something noble, not the dictator who sought glory and destruction, but the resistance that ended him. Not the empire he dreamed of, but the republic that replaced him. And in that, there is hope.